You've just been volunteered to wrestle a tree because someone said your war scream lacked conviction. Welcome to Brutal History for Sleep, where bedtime means bone-deep exhaustion and masculinity is a full-time performance review. If you enjoy drifting off to softly narrated discomfort, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment with where in the world you're watching from and what time your suffering starts. Thank you for helping this strange little channel grow. The night you'll survive, barely. A few miserable days as a Viking soldier, marching through frostbite, fighting over blankets, and proving your worth by shouting at the wind. It's a quiet look at strength, denial, and why no one ever admits they're cold. Now, lie still and prepare to suffer gently. You wake up in what can only be described as a human sardine tin, except sardines probably smell better and definitely complain less. Your beard has frozen to the wooden wall overnight, creating a delightful ice sculpture that you'll have to either melt or rip off, depending on how much you value your facial hair versus your dignity. Neither option is particularly appealing at this ungodly hour. The person whose elbow has been drilling into your ribcage all night is Olaf the Unnecessarily Large, and he's snoring with the enthusiasm of a dying walrus. You'd move, but there's literally nowhere to go. 12 grown men sharing a space meant for maybe 6 sheep is apparently what passes for cozy winter quarters in Viking society. The frost on the inside walls sparkles prettily in the dim light, which would be romantic if it weren't also covering your breakfast. Speaking of breakfast, you roll over and immediately step on Harold's hand. Harold, being the diplomatic soul he is, responds by punching you in the kidney. This is considered a friendly morning greeting in your culture, so you punch him back, which starts a delightful chain reaction of violence that serves as everyone's wake-up call. Nothing says good morning like accidental assault. You stumble outside, beard still partially frozen, to discover that old Eric has already lit the communal fire and is stirring a pot of what he optimistically calls morning stew. It looks like murky water with floating bits of yesterday's disappointment. The smell suggests that several fish died in there, possibly of natural causes, possibly of shame. Eric grins at you with his 3 remaining teeth and ladles some into a wooden bowl that's seen better centuries. Eat up, warrior, he cackles. You'll need your strength for the morning axe competition. Ah yes, the morning axe competition. Because nothing says I'm ready to face the day like hurling sharp objects at a target while half awake and potentially concussed from yesterday's friendly sparring session. This delightful tradition was invented by someone who clearly never considered the possibility of accidentally beheading a fellow warrior before his first meal. You dutifully choke down the stew, which tastes like regret mixed with pond water, and wonder if your stomach lining will survive another day of this culinary adventure. The dried fish that serves as the primary protein source has the texture of leather and the flavour of sadness. You're fairly certain the raw onions are there specifically to make you cry, though whether from their sharpness or the general state of your existence is unclear. Bjorn the perpetually angry approaches with his usual cheerful demeanour, which is to say he looks like he wants to strangle something. His morning routine consists of glaring at the sunrise, spitting into the fire, and challenging the nearest inanimate object to single combat. Today's victim is a particularly offensive-looking tree stump. Right then, you miserable collection of barely functional warriors, bellows Thorvald, the unpleasantly loud, who serves as your morning motivational speaker and warband leader. Time for stretches. Viking stretching, it turns out, is less about flexibility and more about demonstrating that you can grunt louder than the person next to you while contorting into positions that would make a pretzel weep. You're expected to touch your toes while maintaining eye contact with your fellow warriors, because apparently showing physical weakness is less masculine than staring intensely at another man's ankles. The routine escalates into what can only be described as aggressive yoga. You're all standing in a circle, legs apart, bending forward to grab your ankles, while emitting sounds that suggest you're either achieving enlightenment or passing a kidney stone. The goal is to demonstrate that you're flexible enough for combat while rigid enough in your masculinity to make it weird for everyone involved. "Deeper!" shouts Thorvald, who is clearly compensating for something. Your ancestors are watching. Do you want them to think you're soft? Your ancestors, if they're watching, are probably wondering why their descendants are essentially doing interpretive dance in a muddy field at dawn. But cultural tradition demands that you continue this bizarre ritual, so you bend deeper and grunt louder, all while maintaining the illusion that this is somehow preparing you for battle, rather than just making your back hurt. The stretching session concludes with everyone standing in a circle, beating their chests and howling at the sky. This serves no practical purpose whatsoever, but it does help establish the day's general tone of barely controlled chaos mixed with performance anxiety. "Now," announces Thorvald, producing a handful of throwing axes that have seen better decades, "time for the competition." The target is a wooden shield propped against a tree about 20 paces away. Simple enough, except that 20 paces in Viking terms means however far Thorvald feels like walking before he gets bored, and the axes are about as balanced as a drunk goat on ice skates. You line up with the other warriors, each trying to look more confident than the last. Then the surprisingly accurate goes first and, true to his name, splits the shield down the middle with a throw that makes everyone else suddenly very aware of their own inadequacies. He grins smugly and starts braiding flowers into his beard, because apparently that's what you do when you're feeling particularly masculine. Next is Ragnar the Frequently Wrong, who manages to throw his axe backward into the fire, setting light to his own cloak in the process. He plays it off as intentional, claiming he was testing the axe's flame resistance. Nobody believes him, but everyone nods seriously, because admitting that your fellow warrior is an idiot would somehow reflect poorly on the entire group. Your turn arrives with all the fanfare of impending doom. You hefty the axe, which weighs approximately as much as a small child and is about as well balanced. The blade wobbles ominously as you raise it, and you're fairly certain the handle is held together more by hope than by any actual structural integrity. You take aim at the target, draw back your arm, and let fly with what you hope looks like confident precision. The axe soars through the air in a graceful arc that would be beautiful if it weren't heading directly toward old Eric's soup pot. The resulting explosion of morning stew covers everyone within a 15-foot radius. You're now decorated with bits of fish and disappointment, and Eric is staring at the remains of his breakfast with the expression of a man whose will to live has just taken a significant hit. "Excellent technique," bellows Thorvald, who is apparently immune to irony. "Very creative target selection." The other warriors murmur their agreement because criticizing someone's axe-throwing skills is apparently less socially acceptable than being covered in fish soup at dawn. You nod gratefully and try to pretend that destroying breakfast was always your intention. The competition continues with blood, bruises, and somehow a sheep running off with someone's trousers. As the morning's entertainment winds down, Thorvald approaches with the expression of someone about to deliver news that will make your day significantly worse. "Congratulations," he announces, with the enthusiasm of a man about to attend his own funeral. "You've been selected for a special honor. In Viking society, special honor is code for thing nobody else wants to do, which usually involves either walking into obvious danger or handling something that smells like death. You brace yourself for the worst while trying to maintain the expression of grateful enthusiasm that's expected in these situations. You'll be scouting ahead of the main group," Thorvald continues, "alone, for several days, through terrain that may or may not be inhabited by hostile forces. We'll be moving camp in 3 days, and you need to find us a suitable route and location. As you begin gathering your gear, your stomach decides to remind you that it hasn't been having the best time lately. The combination of salted whale meat, fermented fish, and whatever Eric puts in his morning stew has created a digestive situation that can only be described as concerning. Your bowels have apparently decided to go on strike, which is problematic when you're about to spend several days walking through the wilderness with no access to proper facilities. You strap on your armor, which weighs roughly as much as a small mountain, and fits about as well as you'd expect from something designed by people who thought comfort was a sign of weakness. By the time you're fully equipped, you're carrying about 40 kilograms of metal and leather, plus supplies, and you haven't even started walking yet. To complete your preparations, you grab a handful of pine cones from the ground and stuff them in your mouth. This serves as both a natural stimulant and a way to demonstrate that you're hardcore enough to chew on tree parts for breakfast. As you crunch your way through your second pine cone, Thorvald claps you on the shoulder with enough force to rearrange your spine. "Off you go then," he cheerfully announces. "Try not to die in any embarrassing ways. It reflects poorly on all of us. We'll see you back here in 3 days. 3 hours into your solo scouting mission, you make a delightful discovery. The path marked on your crude map appears to have been drawn by someone who was either drunk, blindfolded, or possibly both. What Thorvald confidently described as a well-travelled route through pleasant countryside turns out to be a barely deceivable deer track that leads directly into a bog that smells like a troll's armpit. You stand at the edge of this fragrant wetland, consulting your map and wondering if perhaps you should have paid more attention during the briefing. You choose the bog, because at least bog water can't chase you. Your first step into the marsh produces a squelching sound that suggests the earth is deeply disappointed in your life choices. The second step goes ankle deep into something that has the consistency of pudding and the aroma of despair. By the third step, you're beginning to understand why this route was available for solo scouting. 20 minutes of bog walking later, you encounter your first fellow travellers, a small unit of Viking warriors who are apparently having an even worse time than you are. They're standing knee-deep in murky water, engaged in what appears to be a heated debate about navigation techniques. "The sun is that way," insists a large warrior with a beard that has acquired several new ecosystem components during his bog adventure. "We need to go north." "The sun moves, you absolute turnip," responds his companion, who is attempting to wring bog water out of his cloak while maintaining his dignity. "North is relative." A third warrior, who has somehow managed to get marshweed tangled in his hair, offers the helpful suggestion that they should follow the angry birds, because apparently lost Vikings take navigation advice from waterfowl. You approach this collection of soggy masculinity and offer the traditional Viking greeting of grunting and spitting into the nearest body of water. "Scouting mission," you explain, as if this justifies your presence in a bog at mid-morning. "Patrol," responds Beard Ecosystem, nodding seriously. "Very important patrol business." You join their group temporarily, partly for the company, and partly because there's safety in numbers, even when all the numbers are equally incompetent. Together, you form a small squad of heavily armed men wading through knee-deep marsh water while trying to maintain the illusion that this is somehow dignified. Marching through a freezing bog while being shouted at by warriors whose only volume is rage is technically bonding. You and your temporary unit wade ankle-deep in misery while competing to see who can look the least bothered by frostbite. A fellow soldier breaks a toe on a helmet someone left lying around and pretends nothing happened, because nothing is more Viking than denial. The conversation quickly turns to the traditional Viking topic of who is suffering the least from your current situation. Beard Ecosystem claims that his feet stopped having feelings an hour ago, which he presents as evidence of his superior toughness. Cloakringer counters that he's been ignoring a cramp in his left leg for so long that he's forgotten which leg it was, demonstrating his advanced pain management skills. The journey drags on through thistle, mud, and wolf urine. "At least it's not raining," observes Cloakringer, which is apparently the signal the universe was waiting for. Within minutes, a light drizzle begins, because the bog experience wasn't quite miserable enough without the addition of precipitation. 2 hours of slogging later, you finally reach solid ground, which feels like a miraculous gift from the gods, until you realize that solid ground in this context means muddy hillside covered in thorns. Your new companions prove to be enthusiastic climbing partners, which is to say they're all equally terrible at navigating terrain while wearing 40 pounds of metal. When you finally part ways at the top of the hill, your temporary companions head toward their own mysterious destination, while you continue your scouting mission. "Try not to die in any embarrassing ways," offers Cloakringer as a farewell. You spend the rest of the day and the following day exploring the terrain, mapping potential routes, and discovering new and creative ways for geography to make your life miserable. You find several possible campsites, test water sources, and carefully note which areas appear to be inhabited by things that might object to Viking visitors. The nights are spent in lonely camps with only your own snoring for company, which is somehow both peaceful and deeply unsettling. On the evening of the second day, you make camp near what appears to be a suitable location for the warband, a clearing with access to fresh water, defensible positions, and enough space for 12 warriors to spread their bedrolls without quite killing each other. Everyone takes turns complaining in the manliest tone possible about the solitude, but you maintain the fiction that this is all part of your superior warrior conditioning. One particularly boring evening, you start arm wrestling a tree out of sheer loneliness. By the morning of the third day, you're ready to return to camp with your report, having successfully survived 2 days of solo adventure, without dying, getting lost permanently, or discovering anything genuinely terrifying. You arrive back at the original campsite to discover that your fellow warriors have spent your absence inventing new forms of entertainment that somehow make fire staring seem reasonable by comparison. The camp has evolved into what can only be described as a laboratory for testing the limits of masculine stupidity. Your return is greeted with the traditional shoulder punches and observations about your survival skills, though everyone carefully avoids asking too many questions about your actual accomplishments during the scouting mission. "Welcome back, brother warrior," announces Thorvald, using the tone typically reserved for important proclamations or threats. "We've prepared entertainment for the evening." To maintain morale during your absence, the soldiers apparently invented games like "Who can stare into the fire the longest without blinking?" and "Slap until someone cries, but quietly." You tried to nap during your solo mission, but kept being woken by debates over whether it's unmanly to sleep with a blanket when nobody else is around to judge you. The current activity involves staring directly into the campfire for as long as possible without blinking, because apparently retinal damage is considered a sign of spiritual strength. You join the circle of warriors arranged around the fire, each trying to look more intensely focused than the last. The rules are simple: last person to blink wins the respect of their peers and the right to choose tomorrow's breakfast. Sven, the surprisingly accurate, is currently in the lead, having maintained an unblinking stare for what feels like several hours, but is probably closer to 3 minutes. His eyes are watering freely, creating twin streams down his cheeks that he's pretending are tears of joy rather than the natural response to staring at bright flames. The competition continues with the sort of intensity usually reserved for actual combat. Warriors grunt encouragement at each other while simultaneously trying to distract their opponents through subtle psychological warfare. Eventually you're down to the final 3, yourself, Sven, and a newcomer called Bjorn the Inexplicably Confident. The end comes suddenly when Bjorn, in a moment of overconfidence, announces that he could stare at this fire all night and immediately blinks as if to emphasize his point. You're declared the winner to a chorus of grudging congratulations and shoulder punches that threaten to dislocate various joints. Eventually, someone brought out the fermented seal fat during your absence, the only beverage worse than the cold. The mood had turned festive, until Björn accidentally insulted someone's goat by comparing it to his wife. The duel was declared. No one actually wanted to fight, but social pressure insisted on at least one dramatic nosebleed. It ended with a dislocated shoulder, 2 apologies, and a renewed sense of toxic camaraderie. They all agreed it was a great bonding experience. With the fire staring competition concluded, the evening entertainment moves on to its next phase, competitive storytelling. Each warrior is expected to contribute a tale of personal heroism, preferably involving some combination of impossible odds, creative violence, and a moral lesson about the importance of never backing down from anything. The stories begin with Thorvald's account of the time he allegedly fought off 6 wolves using nothing but a fishing net and his natural charisma. When your turn arrives, you decide to contribute a tale about your recent scouting mission, though you emphasize the intellectual challenges and strategic thinking, rather than admitting that the most dangerous thing you encountered was a particularly judgmental squirrel. Your story involves careful observation of natural signs, strategic route planning, and a climactic moment where you successfully avoided getting lost in a forest that all looked exactly the same. The group receives your story with the sort of thoughtful nodding that suggests they're impressed by your tactical approach, even if it lacks the traditional elements of bloodshed and impossible feats of strength. As the storytelling session winds down, the conversation naturally turns to the traditional Viking topic of comparative suffering. "My back feels like it's been used as an anvil by an angry blacksmith," announces Olaf, stretching dramatically to emphasize his point. "My feet are so numb I can't tell if they're still attached," counters Ragnar, removing his boots to conduct a visual inspection that confirms his feet are indeed present, but looking somewhat worse for wear. The evening gradually settles into the sort of comfortable misery that Vikings consider ideal for group bonding. Dawn of the 4th day arrives with the subtle charm of a physical assault, accompanied by Thorvald's cheerful announcement that today's agenda includes a bit of light pillaging, followed by character-building exercises. Word has arrived of a tiny nearby settlement. Time to pillage. The men cheer, then immediately start arguing over who gets to yell first. Breakfast concluded, Thorvald produces a rough map that looks like it was drawn by someone experiencing a minor earthquake. According to his interpretation, there's a small settlement about 2 hours' march from your current location, and it's apparently ripe for visiting. Visiting is the polite term Vikings use for showing up uninvited and taking things, which is considered a legitimate form of social interaction in your culture. You're appointed as the door-opening specialist, which sounds impressive until you realize it means you'll be the first person to enter any potentially dangerous situation. This honor is bestowed upon you partly because of your recent scouting success and partly because everyone else managed to avoid making eye contact when volunteers were requested. The march to the settlement proceeds with the sort of organized chaos that characterizes most Viking group activities. 2 hours later, you crest a small hill and survey your target, a collection of modest buildings arranged around a central area that might generously be called a village square. As you approach the settlement's main gate, which consists of 2 wooden posts with a rope stretched between them, you're greeted by what appears to be the village leadership, 3 elderly men and a woman who looks like she's had quite enough of unexpected visitors for one lifetime. "Good morning," announces Thorvald in his most diplomatic voice, which still sounds like a barely contained threat. "We're here to discuss trade opportunities." The negotiation proceeds with the sort of polite formality that occurs when both parties understand the subtext, but are trying to maintain the fiction that this is a legitimate business transaction. This is when you're called upon to fulfill your role as door-opening specialist. You approach the door with the confident stride of someone who has been appointed to a task they don't entirely understand. Rather than offering the resistance you expected, the door swings open immediately, revealing that it wasn't actually latched. Your carefully applied force, now unopposed, propels you forward into the building with considerably more momentum than you intended. You stumble through the doorway and immediately encounter the building's current occupant, a large, irritated goose that apparently considers your entrance a personal affront. What follows can only be described as aerial combat between yourself and a waterfowl that has clearly missed its calling as a military tactician. The goose launches itself at your face with the precision of a feathered missile, while you attempt to defend yourself using techniques that were definitely not covered in your warrior training. The goose, demonstrating superior agility and home field advantage, manages to land several direct hits on your helmet before executing a strategic withdrawal to a wooden beam near the ceiling. You emerge from the building, with your dignity somewhat rearranged, and several new scratches on your face that will be difficult to explain in a heroic context. "Excellent intimidation tactics," announces Thorvald, apparently deciding to interpret your encounter with the goose as a deliberate demonstration of Viking ferocity. The raid goes well, if well means slipping on cabbage and getting cursed at by an angry grandmother with better aim than half the warband. The final inventory includes several chickens, vegetables, cheese, plus several additional items that were apparently being held in reserve. These include a woolen blanket that has only minor holes, a collection of clay pots that are mostly intact, and what the villagers describe as ceremonial bread, but is probably just very old. Back at camp, the spoils are divided: 3 turnips, a blanket, and a haunted spoon, among other items. Everyone celebrates while quietly treating their wounds with moss and sarcasm. The final distribution results in each warrior receiving approximately 1/3 of a chicken, a handful of vegetables, and a chunk of cheese that may or may not be safe for consumption. As you sit around the fire, chewing your way through dinner and trying to ignore the sounds your digestive system is making, you find yourself reflecting on the day's events. The raid was technically successful, in that nobody died, and you acquired goods that might eventually prove useful. The goose incident was embarrassing but provided entertainment for your fellow warriors, which has its own value in group dynamics. More troubling is the growing awareness that this lifestyle might not be entirely sustainable. The constant discomfort, the questionable food, the ongoing threat of violence, and the need to maintain a facade of enjoying activities that are objectively unpleasant are beginning to take their toll on your mental state. You lie awake that night staring at the stars, wondering if there's more to life than getting lice in increasingly humiliating ways. The fifth day dawns with you waking to the sound of Thorvald practicing what he calls his morning war cry, which sounds like a combination of aggressive yodeling and someone stepping on a cat. Today, according to Thorvald's increasingly elaborate itinerary, is dedicated to spiritual warrior development, which involves a series of activities designed to reinforce your collective masculinity through ritualized absurdity. It's time for the Masculinity Reinforcement Ceremony, which includes yelling poetry, hitting rocks with other rocks, and screaming at the ocean. The morning schedule includes poetry recitation, rock percussion, and something called ocean confrontation therapy. After what passes for breakfast, the group gathers in a circle for the first activity, competitive poetry recitation. Each warrior is expected to contribute a verse that demonstrates their deep understanding of heroic themes, while showcasing their ability to make words rhyme in ways that technically qualify as artistic expression. You must perform a made-up saga about the time you allegedly killed a bear during your scouting mission. You didn't. No one believes it, but everyone nods solemnly and calls you bear tracker anyway, because pretending is tradition. Sven begins with a stirring piece about the time he allegedly battled a sea serpent, which involves remarkably creative rhyming and several impossible feats of marine combat. In waters deep and cold as stone, I fought the beast, I fought alone. With blade in hand and courage true, I made that serpent's blood run blue. And when your turn arrives, you find yourself faced with the challenge of contributing something that will maintain your warrior credibility while not being completely obviously fictional. You decide on a verse about the philosophical aspects of your recent scouting mission, emphasizing the intellectual challenges rather than admitting that the most dangerous encounter was with judgmental wildlife. Through forest, deep and mountain high, I tracked the bear beneath the sky. With careful step and watchful eye, I learned the secrets none can buy. The poetry session concludes with a group recitation of a traditional verse about the glories of warrior life, which everyone knows by heart, and delivers with the sort of enthusiasm that suggests they're trying to convince themselves as much as anyone else. With artistic expression concluded, the group moves on to the next phase of spiritual development, rock percussion therapy. This involves each warrior selecting a large stone and demonstrating their spiritual connection to the earth by hitting it with smaller stones, while maintaining an expression of deep concentration. Remember, intones Eric with the sort of mystical authority that comes from spending too much time alone in forests, the rocks are our ancestors, show them respect. You select a reasonably sized boulder and begin the prescribed pounding, trying to find a rhythm that suggests deep spiritual connection, rather than simple frustration with your circumstances. Around you, your fellow warriors are engaged in similar stone-based meditation, creating a cacophony of percussion that probably violates several natural laws regarding noise pollution. The rock therapy concludes when Ragnar's stone finally surrenders to his persistent pounding, splitting into several smaller pieces that he declares represent spiritual breakthrough. Ocean confrontation therapy involves marching to the nearest body of water and engaging in ritualized shouting designed to establish dominance over the natural world. The theory, according to Eric's interpretation of ancient warrior traditions, is that yelling at the ocean will demonstrate your fearlessness and spiritual strength. The nearest water turns out to be a small lake that looks entirely too peaceful for effective confrontation. Thorvald volunteers, striding into the water until he's knee-deep, then throwing back his head and producing a war cry that causes several birds to leave the area immediately. "Face me, waters," he bellows, raising his fists toward the sky. "I fear no wave, I fear no tide." When your turn arrives, you wade into the water with the resigned determination of someone participating in a group activity that makes no sense, but must be completed for social cohesion. "Hear me, waters," you shout, trying to match the intensity of your predecessors, while secretly wondering if the fish are judging you. I am very serious about this. Meanwhile, two warriors are still fake feuding over who has the more manly limp from yesterday's village raid. The morning spiritual activities conclude with a group chant that involves everyone standing in a circle, holding hands and producing sounds that are supposed to represent the collective warrior spirit. "Feel the power," shouts Eric, who has apparently achieved some sort of transcendent state through the combination of poetry, rock pounding, and lake threatening. "Feel the ancient strength flowing through us." The night ends with a group chant, some shirtless tree-hugging, and a reminder that emotions are for the weak, unless it's rage, which is encouraged twice daily. Everyone goes to bed sore, half-drunk, and feeling exactly as confused about identity as before. "Excellent work, brothers," announces Thorvald, apparently recovered from his aquatic confrontation. "I can feel the warrior spirit growing stronger within us all." The group nods in agreement, partly because they genuinely feel something has changed, and partly because disagreeing with Thorvald's spiritual assessments would require a level of self-awareness that might undermine the entire morning's work. The sixth day breaks with the subtlety of a brick through a window, accompanied by what sounds suspiciously like armed individuals attempting to be stealthy while wearing full armor. Just before sunrise, the camp is attacked, but only by 5 very tired bandits who immediately regret their life choices. You wake to discover that your peaceful warrior development retreat is about to become significantly more educational, in the sense that you're about to learn whether your training has prepared you for actual combat or just for yelling at lakes. The camp erupts into controlled chaos as everyone simultaneously tries to grab weapons, put on armor, and figure out exactly what's happening, without appearing confused or unprepared. "Attack!" whispers Thorvald, with the sort of intense quiet that suggests he's trying not to wake the enemy, which raises interesting questions about combat etiquette. From your position behind what was recently the breakfast preparation area, you get your first good look at your opponents. 5 individuals who appear to be experiencing their own version of, "This seemed like a better idea when we were planning it." A brief chaotic clash unfolds, involving axe juggling, panicked remnants of last night's dinner, and several men trying to fight while still getting dressed. "Surrender your goods," bellows the leader, using the traditional opening line for this sort of encounter. "And nobody needs to get hurt." What follows can best be described as combat in the academic sense, if academic combat involved a great deal of running around, confused shouting, and several instances of people trying to fight while still putting on their boots. You find yourself facing the nervous thin man, who approaches with the sort of hesitant aggression that suggests he's hoping you'll surrender before he has to figure out what to do with his sword. "Stay back," he warns, pointing his sword in your general direction while simultaneously backing away from you. "I'm very dangerous." The engagement proceeds with the sort of careful circling that occurs when both parties are hoping the other will make the first move. This delicate standoff is interrupted when Ragnar, engaged in his own combat nearby, accidentally backs into you while attempting to avoid his opponent's particularly enthusiastic swing. The resulting collision sends you stumbling forward into your nervous adversary, who responds by attempting to retreat so quickly that he trips over his own feet. You find yourself in the awkward position of having accidentally won a sword fight through no particular skill of your own, as your opponent lands in what was recently Eric's mushroom collection, and appears to have decided that discretion is the better part of valor. The tide of battle shifts decisively when Olaf, attempting to make a dramatic entrance into the fray, trips over the remains of last night's campfire and lands in what can only be described as an inadvertent tackle that brings down 2 of the attacking force at once. "Victory," he announces from his position, tangled up with 2 opponents and several pieces of burning wood. "I have defeated multiple enemies through superior tactics." You, half asleep and covered in the remnants of breakfast preparation, somehow manage to survive by accidentally falling on nobody in particular, but your stumbling technique proves surprisingly effective at avoiding danger. The bandits flee, the camp cheers, and nobody notices you've collapsed behind the latrine area. The remaining attackers, observing their colleagues' rapid transition from threatening invasion force to confused pile of people trying to untangle themselves from camping equipment, seem to reach a collective decision that this particular raid has lost its appeal. The leader makes a strategic announcement about having accomplished their objective and teaching you a lesson about vigilance, which is warrior code for "we're leaving before this gets any more embarrassing." "Let this be a warning," he shouts while walking backward at an increasingly rapid pace. "We'll be watching you." The aftermath of combat involves the traditional activities of checking for injuries, gathering scattered equipment, and reconstructing the battle in ways that emphasize everyone's heroic contributions, while minimizing the role of accidental clumsiness. "Excellent work, warriors," announces Thorvald, who has somehow acquired a small cut on his forehead that will undoubtedly feature prominently in future retellings of this battle. We have shown these bandits the strength of true Viking warriors. As the excitement dies down, and everyone begins the process of cleaning up the campsite, you find yourself dealing with the sort of post-battle exhaustion that comes from sudden adrenaline, followed by equally sudden relief. The combination of post-combat exhaustion, several days of questionable food, and the accumulated stress of maintaining your warrior persona suddenly catches up with you all at once. Exhausted beyond belief, you decide to pretend to be unconscious just to get some peace. In a moment of inspiration, you solve this problem by simply lying down behind the latrine area and closing your eyes. This serves the dual purpose of getting you out of the post-battle celebration and giving you some time to process the week's events without having to maintain your social facade. You arrange yourself in what you hope looks like the aftermath of heroic exhaustion rather than voluntary collapse. From your position of voluntary unconsciousness, you listen to your fellow warriors discussing the battle, their plans for the rest of the day, and various theories about whether the attackers will return with reinforcements. The conversation gradually fades as exhaustion takes over and you drift toward actual sleep. You drift off mid-snore, unsure whether you'll wake up in Valhalla or just with another flea bite. Your last conscious thought is the realization that you've somehow survived a full week of Viking life, complete with scouting missions, spiritual development, questionable food, village raids, and actual combat. Whether this represents personal growth or simply successful adaptation to an inherently absurd situation is a question you're too tired to answer. The morning sun climbs higher, warming your face as you lie there, pretending to be unconscious while actually falling asleep. Hours pass in blissful unconsciousness, your dreams filled with confused images of geese, lakes, rocks that may or may not have been your ancestors, and bog water that somehow achieved sentience. The afternoon sun beats down on your sleeping form as your fellow warriors gradually succumb to their own exhaustion, one by one abandoning their victory celebrations in favor of the simple pleasure of not being conscious. Soon the entire camp is filled with the sort of harmonious snoring that can only be achieved by a group of men who have pushed themselves beyond the limits of reasonable endurance. And so you sleep, surrounded by your brothers in arms, your armor slowly warming in the sun, your beard collecting small bits of forest debris, and your dreams filled with the sort of epic adventures that somehow seem much more appealing when they're happening to someone else. The Viking life continues around you, but for now, you're blissfully unaware of its demands, its contradictions, and its tendency to involve far more physical discomfort than the recruitment songs ever mentioned. The forest watches over this collection of exhausted warriors with the patient indifference of something that has seen countless such scenes before, and will see countless more. Somewhere in the distance, the defeated bandits are probably having their own version of this conversation, wondering how their simple raid turned into slapstick comedy, and whether there might be easier ways to make a living that don't involve approaching armed groups of people who might accidentally defeat you through superior clumsiness. But these are concerns for another day, another adventure, another opportunity to discover new and creative ways for things to go wrong while maintaining the illusion that everything is proceeding according to plan. For now, there is only sleep, snoring, and the gentle afternoon breeze that carries away the last echoes of the morning's chaos. The sun continues its journey across the sky, marking time in a world where heavily armed men regularly engage in activities that would puzzle philosophers and entertain children. Your breathing settles into the steady rhythm of deep sleep, occasionally interrupted by small snorts that suggest your subconscious is still processing the week's events and finding them mildly amusing. As evening approaches and the forest begins its transition to night sounds, you remain peacefully unconscious, having finally achieved the sort of rest that comes only to those who have successfully survived a full week of trying to be something they're not entirely sure they want to be. Your fellow warriors sleep around you, each lost in their own dreams of glory, adventure, and possibly meals that don't require archaeological excavation before consumption. The campfire burns low, tended by no one but somehow maintaining itself through what can only be described as sheer stubborn persistence. The embers glow softly in the gathering dusk, providing just enough light to illuminate the peaceful scene of exhausted warriors who have finally stopped trying to prove anything to anyone, and have embraced the simple pleasure of being horizontal. Night falls gently over the camp, bringing with it the sounds of nocturnal creatures beginning their own daily routines, and the soft whisper of wind through trees that have witnessed countless such scenes, and remain philosophically neutral about the whole business of human ambition and its frequently comic results. You sleep on, dreaming perhaps of homes with actual roofs, meals that don't fight back, and a life where the most dangerous thing you encounter before breakfast is deciding what to wear. But these are dreams, and morning will come again, bringing with it new opportunities for adventure, character development, and the discovery of previously unknown limits to human endurance. For now, though, there is peace. There is rest. There is the gentle sound of warriors snoring in harmony, their breath forming small clouds in the cooling air, their armor creaking softly as they shift in their sleep. It's almost beautiful in the way that exhaustion can make anything seem profound and meaningful. The stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky, ancient lights that have watched over countless generations of warriors, dreamers, and people who probably should have chosen less strenuous careers. They shine down on this small group of sleeping Vikings with the same patient indifference they've shown to every other human endeavour, magnificent and distant and utterly unconcerned with the daily struggles of mortals who think yelling at lakes constitutes spiritual development. And in this moment of perfect stillness, surrounded by the gentle sounds of the forest night and the rhythmic breathing of your fellow adventurers, you achieve something that all the morning exercises and warrior rituals couldn't provide: genuine peace. Not the forced tranquility of someone trying to convince themselves they're having a good time, but the real thing. The deep satisfaction of someone who has finally stopped fighting against their circumstances and simply accepted them. Sleep well, warrior. Dream of warm fires and solid ground beneath your feet. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities to question your life choices, and probably new varieties of discomfort you haven't yet experienced. But tonight, you rest in the company of brothers who share your confusion, your exhaustion, and your stubborn determination to see this strange adventure through to whatever end awaits. The forest keeps its ancient vigil, the stars continue their eternal dance, and somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls out with a sound that might be laughter, or might just be the universe's way of commenting on the beautiful absurdity of it all. Thank you for listening, one last time. May your sleep be deep, your dreams quiet, and your mind at peace. Good night.